Well, hello and good morning or good afternoon to everyone that has joined us today, and happy summer. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 2020 Epsilon Sigma Phi webinar hosted by the Professional Development Committee. We're happy that so many of you could join us today. My name is Jeanette Ray Keywood, and I serve as the Epsilon Sigma Phi Professional Development Committee Chair. Please take a moment to drop your name and institution in the chat box so we know who we have with us today. Our presentation today is Demonstrating Impact, Lessons Learned from a National Effort. Our presenters are Elizabeth Kiss, Associate Professor and Extension Specialist, Kansas State, Suzanne Bartholomae, Assistant Professor and Extension State Specialist, Iowa State University, and Maria Pippidis, Extension Educator, Family Community Sciences, and County Director, University of Delaware. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the National ESP website as well as other webinars that we have offered. And we ask that you keep your mute on during the presentation. And if you have any questions or statements to make, please place them in the chat box. There will be some time at the end of the webinar for presenters to answer questions. Now, without further ado, I will turn our time over to our presenters, Elizabeth, Suzanne, and Maria.
Thank you, Jeanette. And I'm going to start us off. I'm Suzanne Bartholomae, as you already introduced us. Did you know that financial literacy education is a booming industry? Nationwide surveys show that adults and high school students earn failing grades on financial literacy tests, indicating that they have a lack of knowledge of personal finance basics. As a result, there are now more than 2,100 nonprofit organizations across the nation that offer and deliver financial literacy programs. There are thousands of financial services companies like banks and credit unions, larger banks that invest millions of dollars into financial education, particularly those bigger banks that want to have a flagship financial education program. USDA NIFA is one of 14 federal agencies that supports financial literacy programs along with others. So about 5 years ago, a group of family resource management extension specialists got together and we asked, can we highlight our comparative advantage in financial literacy education relative to other organizations that are working in this space? Next slide. Jeanette introduced us. I'm Suzanne Bartholomae. I'm an assistant professor and extension state specialist in family finance at Iowa State University. I'm here with Elizabeth Kish from K-State, who's also a state extension specialist, and Maria Pippidis, who's an extension educator at the University of Delaware. She's everything, the state specialist, the county director, and everything. So we are really happy to have the opportunity to share our work with you. We decided that no, we weren't doing enough to highlight our work across states, and so this national reporting project came about. Next slide, Elizabeth. We were interested in knowing who is here with us today, so we're created a poll, and if you could tell us what program area you represent. I'm going to give you a second to complete that. And I don't know, Jeanette, if you're working the polls, and we'll get to see, you're going to publish the results.
I will certainly do that. Another couple of seconds. Okay, I'm going to end the polling. We do have an 88% response rate.
That's great standards for surveys.
Can you see the results?
I am not seeing the results.
Okay, well, let me, I'm not sure why you're not seeing them, but we have 3% in ag, 11% in 4-H youth development.
Oh, there they go. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, 13% in community development, 47, almost half from family and consumer sciences, 3% from extension administration. I guess everybody can see them. And then a split, some people with split appointments or another appointment that makes up about 24% of our audience. Okay, so we were interested to see who would be here today and how many of you might be tied into our area of programming. So thank you for answering that poll. Next slide, Elizabeth. Okay, so today in about 50 minutes, we are going to share the details of our national reporting project. So it's a project that organizes evaluation efforts among extension professionals in the Family Resource Management Program area. We're going to start with the project overview and the rationale for a national reporting project. There are 5 overarching goals that we're going to review one by one with some of the strides that we have made to accomplish those 5 goals. We're also going to present the national data that we've aggregated in 2017 as part of a concept test, and then the 2018 and 2019 data that we collected subsequently. We're also going to share the lessons that we've learned from this work, which are many, and those that we continue to learn. Next slide. Okay, before we get started, we want to just give a quick overview of what is family resource management. So FRM is what I'm going to refer to it as because it's a mouthful to say family resource management. So FRM is typically housed in extension as part of the family and consumer science team. NEFA, Family and Consumer Science Program focus is in the area of family resource management is on family and consumer economics. Actually the Family and Consumer Science Program focus is on family and consumer economics, which is typically where FRM will fall. Healthy homes and community living, sometimes FRM falls into that area with housing and foreclosure programs. Nutrition, health, and physical activity, FRM will fall into smart food budgets, money, how you spend your money on food budgets and other areas. And then human development and family well-being. The academic homes for family resource management professionals are typically in human development and family studies. In other cases, they might be in another department. For example, Elizabeth at K-State is housed in a financial planning program. So it just depends on the land grant. So family resource management has been around for a long time, and it recognizes that the quality of the day-to-day decisions of individuals and families are important not only to families and individuals, but also to society, that we're really dependent on those quality day-to-day decisions. And so our content supports this strategic role of families in society. And we focus on resource management. So the management of time, money, and skills. Family resource management extension professionals will conduct and support programming with a variety of partners and audiences. And for all the colleagues in extension that are on the line at the webinar today, I'm sure many of you have collaborated with family resource management colleagues in your from your land grant, hopefully. If you're from 4-H, you may have participated, or you may have recruited an FRM colleague to help with a money camp or to be a judge at a 4-H consumer judging contest. Annie's project is in the ag area, and there's a lot of collaboration between FRM and ag on that project. So those are just some examples. Next slide. Okay, so we want to set the stage for our national reporting project. And it really starts with the question of, does financial education work? And this is a topic that has been in the news. It's a newsworthy topic, and it's a question worth asking because we do the work in this area. All extension programs recognize the need to share the success of programs because it's the basis for our decision making on how we use resources, our staffing decisions, and funders look at these program results. So we know that it's really critical to share the successes of our programs and to measure the success of our programs. In our field of family resource management and financial literacy in particular, in the past 2 decades, there have been a lot of reviews that have been published on the efficacy of financial education. There have been GAO reports in the early about 10 years ago. There's reports that have been issued by the President's Advisory Council on Financial Capability. Financial capability and financial literacy are kind of two terms that are used interchangeably in our field, but there is a President's Advisory Council that on this topic. There's also been reviews in academic scholarship that will focus on the efficacy of financial education. The takeaway from these reports and their authoritative reports is that the efficacy of financial education programs is inconsistent and that they are inconclusive. And the media likes to pick up on academic research, and journalists like to write about findings and share it with the public. So this first headline, "Stop Trying to Make Financial Literacy Happen," highlighted a study that was published in 2014 that it was a meta-analysis of over 200 studies, and it had 2 major findings. It showed, one, that the effects of financial education decays over time. So that within 20 months, almost everybody who had taken a financial literacy class had forgotten what they had learned. It also showed that once a study adjusted for a person's family background and their personality traits, that financial education only had a negligible impact on subsequent financial decisions and behavior. The second title I have here that you can see here is Against Financial Literacy Education. And so this is one of several reviews that a law professor, Lauren Willis, has published from Loyola Law School. And she argues that financial literacy education is a colossal waste of time and money, as she puts it, for everybody except for those companies that are sponsoring these financial education programs. So her law reviews are really critical of the research and the evaluation in this area. In her critiques, she questions whether or not we should be using public dollars for the efforts in financial education literacy. Maybe those dollars would be spent better elsewhere. She advocates for more consumer protections in financial markets, that she would rather see efforts put towards regulation and policy initiatives. And she definitely has a point. You know, we have to make choices about where we invest limited resources. And so maybe her case is it's not actually financial education where we should be putting those dollars. And that there was one study that was published that said that the people that went the people that went through the program actually ended up having harmful effects, and so she likes to highlight that study too. The literature is changing in terms of promising results, but seeing these messages in the mainstream and seeing them in the academic literature really that our work is inconsistent and inconclusive really got us thinking. When you look at these reviews, extensions, financial education programs are typically not included. Our evaluations aren't the gold standard, which are randomized control trials or quasi-experimental design approach to evaluation. And systematic reviews typically will have criteria, inclusion criteria, that might say, well, for example, the meta-analysis that I mentioned a minute ago had to have a pre and a post test and a 2-week follow-up using a quasi-experimental design. So most extension financial education programs don't have the staffing, the time, or the resources to produce this level of evaluation. But we know we do good work. And so we also know that extension, whether it's in family resource management or 4-H, that we have a comparative advantage over other organizations, regardless of what we're offering. We offer evidence-based or evidence-informed programs. They're based on theories of change. They're based on adult learning theory. Our programs are non-commercial and they're non-biased, which is really important in financial education. When a lot of those banks and financial service companies that are offering financial education are typically selling a product or some type of a service to go along with that educational initiative. So it's really important for the consumers to have the type of organization like Extension to offer financial education. We also have seasoned educators who understand the content area, they understand learning theory, which a lot of these other 2,100 organizations that I mentioned and the hundreds of banks that are offering financial education really don't have that advantage. So we started our national reporting work to kind of counteract these headlines. Next slide, Elizabeth. Okay, so at the same time that we were hearing about the lack of efficacy of financial education programs in the literature and in headlines, family and consumer science program leaders in the North Central region sponsored the BATTELLE organization to conduct an evaluation of the family and consumer science extension programs in the North Central region. So the goal was to document the impact of FCS programs. In 2015, they published a report, and they concluded that FCS extension programming resulted in substantial economic returns to the nation, and that the programs make a positive difference at the community level by putting into place an infrastructure that facilitates positive behavior to help improve the health and well-being of individuals and families. With regard to FRM and the BATTELLE report, it said that programs are effective on many levels, but it also noted that our efforts in evaluation were frustrated by inconsistencies across the states in the reporting methods that were used, and in some cases, the lack of useful data. For all FCS programs, not just FRM, BATTELLE recommended that we reduce our efforts, our parallel efforts, and that we combine our efforts in evaluation work so that we can better document our program success. So this is not a regional issue. This is a system-wide issue for FRM and for other extension program areas. So for us, we have a crowded field of financial education. We have published scholarship telling us that we have programs that may not be effective. We had this BATTELLE report, and we said, you know what? This set the stage for saying, hey, you know what? It's time to maybe get together and try and make an effort for our national reporting project. So we have another, next slide, please. We're gonna have another poll to get you guys moving here. Are you involved in a common reporting effort in your program area? We're curious about that. Are you involved maybe at the state level, at the national level? Maybe you're not sure.
Take another second to complete the poll, and we will launch the results.
Okay, so more than half of those with us today are reporting, doing some common reporting at the state level. 20% almost in the national level, and then the remaining 15% are not involved in common reporting, and then about 17% aren't sure. Thank you for that feedback. Okay, in the chat then, for those of you that are or are not involved, even if you're not sure, what do you think are some of the challenges or opportunities that there might be for a national program reporting system? Why don't you can you describe what you might see as a challenge or an opportunity that you've had regarding national program reporting? And if you type that into the chat box. So a challenge is consistent collection of data. And then that's an opportunity to have consistent collection of data, right? Agreeing what to measure and using consistent standards. Barb Wellen from Iowa, yes. Using the same surveys throughout the states, that is definitely a challenge. Having a designated person that would treat the evaluation data and do the analysis, that's their only job. We use the term herding cats, right? That is being able to collect the data from lots of individuals has kind of been part of our job as leading this national extension effort. So it would be nice to have people that were designated just to help with that data collection effort. Yeah, and different states measure different things. Yeah, there's a lack of time. And that's, there's been surveys that have in the area of family resource management about the capacity of evaluation among family resource management specialists, and what you're highlighting in the chat box pretty much parallel those survey results, that people lack time, they lack staff, there's a problem with measurement. Okay, next slide. Well, thank you for that feedback and that thinking. So we are going to report on our 5 overarching goals of our national reporting project. So we want to, identify, the 5 goals are going to be, again, like broken down throughout the next 20 minutes or so, and the evidence of the activity that we've done around each of these goals. So one of the goals was to identifying and strengthening the links between local programming, state initiatives, and then what the national priorities are at USD and NEFA. So we engaged with FRM colleagues to learn about the programs that they delivered, the level of evaluation data that they collected, and how data collection happened. Over time, we developed a logic model, which you'll hear about, and we identified umbrella and specific indicators, which you'll also learn about from Maria. We tried to bring leadership to this national reporting effort, so we identified and convened the state and county FRM contacts. We have had changing leadership at NEFA in the area of family resource management. Our program leader has changed in the transition, a couple of times since I've been in extension in transition. And so we're trying to fill a little bit of a vacuum that has been created because of that, and really get FRM organized. We've tried to develop a system to aggregate data. So again, we identified what indicators we should be collecting. We developed and pilot tested a data collection instrument. We implemented a concept test for 2018, and then we've been collecting data in 2018 and 2019. It was pretty evident that it was important to provide support for our FRM colleagues, so providing training and increasing awareness about evaluation and reporting. At our professional development organization, which is AFCPE, which is the Association for Financial Counseling, Planning, Education, we are every year have been on the extension pre-conference agenda to help increase this awareness and to provide some training in some cases. We also have a community of practice, which we are able to provide updates periodically on their webinars or through their listservs. We've been trying to disseminate the information through about the reporting project through various professional organizations. So NCR-FCS, we had a presentation in 2019, and then we're really happy to be here today. Finally, the reporting program impacts is the other main goal, obviously, is to try and aggregate that data so that we can tell a national story, and Elizabeth will be sharing that final goal. So I'm going to turn it over to Maria so she can go through the first 4 overarching goals, and it's all yours, Maria.
Thank you, Suzanne. So I'm going to get to review the first goal and kind of give us a little history. And so our first goal was to discover and strengthen the links between local programming, the state initiatives, and those national priorities. And Suzanne and I started back in 2015 and decided we needed to know what was happening out there already, and figure out how to kind of organize a system, the system to begin to investigate, is this a worthwhile project? Do people want to get on board on that with this and whatnot? And so you can kind of see here from the bullets, we did a quick review, had some conversations with folks at NEFA, and did a survey with FRM professionals in the program regarding the kinds of programs they may be doing, meaning the topic areas or curriculum modules, what level of evaluation they were using, if they were you know, using data collection and then kind of like what happens to it. We eventually had enough enthusiasm for this that we really put people into work groups, and we had folks working together to identify maybe some evaluation strategies, work on logic models, begin to kind of culminate indicators, do that curriculum inventory, and a review of that scholarly research. And so you can see then outputs from those things were the development of a logic model, those umbrella indicators, and I'll speak to what that is in a minute, as well as sort of specific indicators and the crosswalk. We developed a briefing paper and disseminated that in 2017, and developed some what we call reporting placemats and the impact statements for the 2018 to 2020 data. Okay, next slide, please. So one of the interesting things that we found out, you know, as we kind of talked with our NIFA contacts, is at the federal level, right, every state sends in an annual plan of work, and then at the end of the year, an annual report of accomplishments and results. And that includes some output data and some impact stories. For our program initiatives, they fall under the NIFA knowledge areas KA 801, which is individual and family resource management, and KA knowledge area 607, which is consumer economics. And so depending on those reports that get sent in, our states may or may not be reporting under those knowledge areas. And if an impact statement or an impact story is written, then it may get added. And so some states are reporting in the FRM area and others are not. And so when we connected and sort of said, hey, can you give us any aggregated data at the national level? They basically said, no, we can search by these knowledge areas and provide you with some maybe state-based data and or those impact stories. So that really got us motivated to start working harder on this project. And there are also the land grant impacts at Texas A&M University.edu is another place where impact statements are housed, and it's a searchable website. And there were a few there when we did our initial search. Okay, next slide, please. And so when we looked at the NIFA outcomes for those knowledge areas, this is basically what can get reported, right? And so these are what I kind of think about is some of our overarching indicators, right? This is what could get reported. And so you can basically see the number of individuals who've learned about financial capability, and they give us some topic areas, who learn about consumer decision making, maybe people who've improved or adopted financial capability or consumer behavior skills, and then people who've reported changes. So it's basically, you know, increased knowledge, you know, increased, you know, have adopted something or improved their skills, or have reported they've actually changed behavior. Okay, next slide, please. So the other thing we did a quick search of was, you know, were there any previous initiatives that really tried to capture across the country data from, and as it turns out, it was typically based on either a program, a specific curriculum, right, or an initiative that many extension organizations were involved in. So the NEFI High School Financial Planning Program was one of those. The kind of the first iteration of a community of practice, the financial security later in life, that was a group that was trying to aggregate data around anything that extension was doing around retirement or sort of later in life topics in family resource management. There was a Money 2000 initiative as well. And so again, that was sort of a specific content area and curriculum that might be used. And those things that happened in the past in terms of current ideas or current curriculums, the Small Steps to Health and Wealth initiative, the Your Money, Your Goals toolkit, training of trainers was another example, and then the Smart Choice Health Insurance Initiative out of Delaware and Maryland was another one where we were training people across the state and trying to collect that data to be able to report out in an aggregated way. Okay, next slide. So in 2017, we put out a survey and said, what programs are you doing out there? And like some of those challenges that you wrote in the chat, there's lots of programs that are happening and lots of programs that have been developed and shared and then adapted a little bit and then used, and maybe parts of it were used. And so people are doing all sorts of things, which is what we're good at, right? We're good at that. It's sort of adapting to our audiences, but you can see there's a lot of programs out there. All right, next up. So one of the things then we also kind of worked on was this idea of a logic model, and tried to really and capture all of the different people and organizations that we're partnering with and who's involved in the programming around our inputs. Tried to capture and articulate all of those activities that we're doing and who we might be partnering with, and then who are our primary target audiences. And so you can see all sorts of different audiences as well as the media audiences. And then we really focused on our outcomes, right? Our learning, our action, our behavior change outcomes, and then condition change outcomes. So there is a logic model then that we developed, not only for consumers, this one is for consumers, but we also recognized as a team that we are training other either volunteers or professionals who are then turning around and working with other organizations. So next slide articulates this. So you can see, I'll just say the top row is really about training those professionals or volunteers. And then we have objectives, outcomes for them. And then we also identified that one of the roles some of us are playing is really about serving on boards, making presentations to stakeholders and decision makers, and that those stakeholders are some of our target audiences. And so I really love this logic model because it really speaks to the different types of audiences that we're working to or working with, and kind of the different outcomes we are hoping to create for those different audiences. And Mary asked, can we get a copy of the logic model? And we're going to talk about that. And of course, the answer is yes, right? So the logic model is a really important tool that we have available to you. And next slide. The next thing our group did was we looked at what are some of those very specific indicators that measure kind of outputs as well as perceptions, knowledge, skills, attitude, aspirational confidence, kind of at that level of change, behavior change, and then at some level conditional change. And so there is a list, as you can see, Appendix C, of these indicators that can be used by folks. Next slide, please. And then the last thing our group did, right, is really tried to crosswalk these indicators. And so I'm going to start on the right-hand side. So on the right-hand side of this chart are all of the indicators very similar to the ones that are listed on the previous slide. And then the umbrella indicators are ones that are using kind of umbrella level language, so that if I am, say, doing a workshop on credit, and my colleague is doing something on budgeting, for example, we could at the state level combine those and report under one of these umbrella indicators, right? So for example, total number of individuals who developed an effective financial management consumer economics skill, right? So at that point, we'd be helping them develop a skill. But no matter what topic I'm teaching, we would be able to collapse that or aggregate across the topics. So that's what the umbrella indicators are all about. And then in the left-hand column, these are the NIFA indicators. And so what we wanted to try to help people do is figure out, okay, so I might be using these umbrella indicators or these very specific indicators, but I need to know where to report them to NIFA. And so that's what that first column is. And so the crosswalk then is helpful for individuals who are in program planning mode, but also reporting mode. And it can also be used kind of at the state level to kind of get organized for all of your team to begin to be more consistent with how you're reporting. Okay, next slide. So, in the chat, or sorry, in the poll, just let us know. Are you using any common logic model or listing of indicators for your program initiatives? Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay. Why don't you give us the summary here?
We're at about 70% response.
All right, so that's great. We're 71% of us are working on kind of common logic models and a list of indicators for your program areas. That's awesome. And 30% of us are still a little floundering out there. We need to kind of get connected into some systems or begin to build systems that will help you do that across the state and or, you know, across a program topic. You know, for example, I know our Dining with Diabetes initiatives, they have really worked hard across the states to come up with those common indicators. All right, next slide. Thank you for that. So our second goal was really to bring some leadership to a national reporting efforts. And so sort of the way we try to do that is really begin to identify and convene state and county FRM personnel who's working in this area and invite them to participate. And then Suzanne and I and Elizabeth began to sort of facilitate consensus building meetings and engaged people in the process of being part of that process and providing input into that process. We authored a briefing paper and we shared that with program leaders. And then we've been convening personnel since 2015 at the AFCPE roundtable discussion. And so as Suzanne said, we've been trying to kind of keep that group of FRM people engaged and informed of our process. So next slide. And so one of the things that we really wanted to make sure that this initiative was as inclusive as possible. And so we worked on kind of building these organizing principles. And so it's maintaining inclusion and making sure that the process continues to make it happen and really recognize people who are participating and contributing. And if we can support opportunities for scholarship, we've been doing that. And, you know, trying to navigate that difference between authorship and acknowledgement, because we know people are on their promotional tracks and they need to have things on their vita. But trying to make sure that everyone is acknowledged appropriately, right? In terms of the data collection process, it's like, how do we keep it simple and effective? And then certainly try and recognize and accommodate as best as possible all of the differences between states and how what their process really looks like. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth. Oh, wait. No, I'm not quite yet. So I mentioned a briefing paper. It is posted. This is the URL. We can put it in the chat box, and in it is sort of a little bit of this history as well as the logic models, the indicators, and the crosswalk. So all those tools are in this document. With that, I will turn it over to Elizabeth.
Okay, yeah, and I double checked yesterday and the URL still works, so yay, because you never know, things change. So I'm Elizabeth Kish, and I get to talk about sort of what happened next. I'm kind of the keeper of the data, so these are some of the things that really get me excited. As both Suzanne and Maria indicated, we did identify these umbrella specific and cross indicators and then crosswalk them. That was during 2016-17. We were at an AFCPE meeting and we kind of were like, well, how about if we try this? And sometimes, you know, extension people, we're out there, we're leading the pack, but sometimes when it comes to our own work, we can be a little bit hesitant. So we said, okay, we're going to develop and implement a concept test. And people were okay with that because it wasn't too scary. It was like, we just try it, let's see what happens. And then in the meantime, we were like, but that's not going to be until 2018 data. How about if we test our data collection instruments with data that we already have from 2017? And then now we're actually beginning with 2019 data. So beginning with last fall, we are into our permanent sort of mode. And now we get into the part about how do we keep it going. So we have these report forms, and these have come through a couple of different iterations, but what we try to make it really simple, as we've said. And so as a group, we developed among the state contacts and at the various places that we've spoken and gotten input from colleagues, we've developed these forms that people can use at the state level to aggregate their state data. And then this is what we ask people to report within, we use Qualtrics survey that gets sent out in January. So part of this was we needed to provide training to personnel and increase awareness of evaluation and reporting. In the chat earlier, there was some conversation about, you know, everyone's not reporting the same thing, or there's fidelity to programs, right? So there's some issues about that. So we really have, and I think our, the e-extension Financial Security for All community of practice overall has been involved in this even since before 2015, but over time we've really tried to, as people come into our network, to just keep raising up the level of understanding, familiarity, confidence that we all have as individual extension professionals when it comes to evaluation and reporting. Maria mentioned one of our guiding principles or organizing principles, and that is to be inclusive. And part of being inclusive is at the lowest, I don't want to say lowest, at the basic level, what could every state who wanted to, who has data, what could they report? And so we decided at a minimum, if you can report your number of workshops provided and you can report your number of people reached, we want that. We want to hear from as many states as possible. Obviously within extension, we also want to know the number who might have increased knowledge, planned to change behavior, or who actually made a change. But you know, at a minimum, we want to know the number of workshops and the number of people reached. We understand those are outputs and not necessarily outcomes, but we're growing this, and so that's our base. You can see here it says report to state, lead contact, or connect with us. And so we did put out a call through the community of practice and the specialist networks about what states want to be involved. Please identify a state contact. And so we have these meetings. So then what can we report? We do have some impact. Maria mentioned, we call these things placemats. And that's because I was reading an evaluation article, and that's what they did as a way to share information with stakeholders. And we've actually physically printed some of these at different times and taken them with us to conferences so people can get their hands on them and can look at them. This is again 2017, so this would be our pilot data. The red stars indicate the states that were able to submit at very little notice, basically what they were already doing when we got started on this program or this effort. And so if you're from one of these red states, maybe your data has been counted and included in what we've done. We then, what we really wanted to know was how many extension professionals are engaged in this work, how many states, how many counties. You can see we had almost, well, 750,000, let's say it that way. I think that sounds good. Consumers were reached with the 2017 programming efforts. We wanted to know how many completed post-program surveys. You can see that there. How many programs. One thing, and this is a lesson learned, and in this idea of trying to keep it simple, but also be responsive to the differences between and among states, is you can see that we have different reporting years. And this was something that we could have gotten bogged down in our early days, in our early discussions. And we finally just said, you know what? We go with what you have. And if you report consistently year over year, it will all be fine. And so some people, some states are calendar years, others are fiscal, state fiscal, and one state didn't actually even know what their reporting period was. But as long as they use the same one the next year, that's fine. And then for 2018 data, just kind of changed it up a little bit. And also we had a little bit different data that people were able to report. And then, so here's a summary of what we've done for these 3 years. So remember, 2017 was our pilot year. 2018 data is our captured through our concept test. And then 2019 is like the real deal. And you can see there's wide variation, right? We sort of go up and down. We've also learned over time that what's a program? I think all of you have had these conversations probably. Is it a one-time thing? Is it a series? If it's one-time program, you know, one-time effort, is there a minimum length? And we decided as an aggregate group, as a national group, we are not going to judge what people are doing in their states. So however your state defines a program, that's how we're doing it. We also realized, though, between 2018 and 2019, that there's a lot of work that gets done one-on-one, and we were missing that. So we made the adjustment to include that. So in the chat, what we'd like to know, because we had this discussion and we still kind of talk about it, is if we were to report one behavior change within FRM, what would that be? And for a while we kind of landed on savings, although that's a little bit difficult to capture, we were finding. But from your program area, if you could let us know in the chat, what would be one behavior change outcome that you think should be collected? Okay, so paying bills in full, start an emergency fund. Raising credit score, okay. Making a healthy food choice, so that's from nutrition, yep. Using information. So thank you for that, and I think we probably better just keep moving. We'll continue to look over that. Thank you. So I'll go ahead and advance the slide, and Suzanne, then it will be your turn again.
Okay, great, thank you. So this slide is an aggregation of our activities. So as part of any evaluation, you count numbers, your outcome numbers, but then we also decided to count our outputs and activities. When you have a project of this scale and of this, how long it's been going on, we decided that we needed something to really invigorate our work in a way, because we've been doing this for 5 years, and then it's important just to stop and say, all right, what have we actually accomplished besides the great things that Elizabeth has just shared in terms of the data collection. So we just try to put a number on and codify here our activities. So since our first meeting in 2015 at AFCPE, we've regularly convened family resource management extension professionals. We've had 27 meetings to date. We presented or facilitated sessions at 7 national meetings. We've developed 6 tools to help guide the evaluation and reporting by family resource management professionals. So that logic model, those indicators, the briefing paper. We've also developed and implemented the concept test for 2018. And then we have what we hope is an inclusive and effective process for collecting local and statewide data at the aggregate level. Next slide. So we're going to move on to some of the lessons learned. And when I was listening to Maria tell us about the organizing principles, I realized it seems like maybe we reiterated our organizing principles almost in terms of our overall lessons learned. That we early on recognized that people were coming at this project very differently. So we wanted to honor everybody and where they're coming from and be inclusive. We didn't want the data collection process and reporting to be too strict so that it would exclude people. Not all FRM professionals are involved in the state's plan of work. They may just report their data to their program director. And so recognizing that there's differences, we wanted to be inclusive. So that was an important lesson. We mentioned that we're keeping it simple, as Elizabeth said, that we're counting numbers, and we are hoping to build in complexity as we build our system. Because it's, every step along the way, we've had to ask questions, we've had to reach consensus about so many issues, whether it's what is a program, what is follow-up, the list goes on and on. Should we be measuring a topic? Should we be measuring a curriculum? In terms of how we connect those to indicators. So we decided we're just gonna, an important lesson is let's keep it simple, and then we can build as we move on. We thought it was important to set goals. And so we had a really simple goal, was that we just wanted to collect some data from every participant for every program so that we could tell a national story of outreach and impact. And so that one goal is really what kind of pushed us to count beyond just programs and participants, but even just having programs and participants is enough too. We understood that there were different capacities by program areas. Some people are more attuned to evaluation and reporting that occurs in their state, versus others need help translating what we're doing so that they can go back to their state and help get data from their system and report it to the national project. A lot of people have a limited role in reporting. So some states have a specialist that might lead reporting in evaluation, others don't. In Kansas, I know, Elizabeth, every county will report, at the county level, reports to Elizabeth, and then she aggregates it. So not everybody is involved in the reporting system, so it's important to recognize what people's roles are. Not everybody has access to the data either. The important lesson was that if you're going to try and do this in your area, that you might conduct a concept test, because we were really able to clearly define what we wanted to be reported. We developed a glossary of terms of what we meant by what we were asking on those forums, in terms of what's a follow-up, what's a program, what's a volunteer, what's a professional. And then it's really important to communicate regularly and to convene regularly, just to keep the project going, but then also to make sure that we're reaching consensus and that we're on the same page. We think it's important to disseminate our accomplishments, right? So that we can keep the energy going, bring recognition to the FRM work. And again, we appreciate the opportunity today. So we also realize that you have to be really patient with a project like this, that we have to remind ourselves of our goals, of why are we doing this? Why do we think it's important, when, this is a whole level of work that requires time and energy. So next slide, please. Okay, and this project timeline really is just a summary of our process summary, and it kind of just lays out visually what we've been doing over time. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. Could you go to the next slide? And I think that the lessons learned from the concept test, Elizabeth covered a lot of these already, that we have so many differences in the reporting practices within a state, and there are a lot of challenges that are follow with that. So Elizabeth showed the different reporting calendars that people follow. Some states are already working on common indicators within their evaluation and system on the system level, and like say an extension. There, again, Elizabeth mentioned there are differences in what we count as a program and what gets reported. There's differences in who's involved. So we have a lone wolf like Maria versus, maybe Elizabeth, who is, heads up a team of a dozen people, or actually a lot more than a dozen people. We realized the narrowness of our savings indicator, and we were really trying to get to that one measure. We did came down on measuring savings, but we really wanted to get at the dollar amount of what people save as a result of attending a program. But our measure didn't want to just capture what money went into a bank, but also like money that's recaptured being used like from different activities. So if you reduced your debt level, what's that dollar amount? So we're working on that savings indicator, and it's kind of a complex and imperfect measure, I would say. As Elizabeth mentioned, we realized that we weren't capturing volunteers' reach or their dollar value like a lot of programs do. We also heard from states like Minnesota that they're spending a lot more time doing train-the-trainer type programs and not consumer education. And so we had to capture that as well. Next slide. All right, so how does your state share outcome information with decision makers? And I realize we're running out of time, but if you could take a second to answer that question. We're curious about, and decision makers could be any range of decision makers. It could be at the state level. Impact reports are shared with decision makers, okay? And right now we're working on what we're calling an impactographic, where we're trying to summarize all of our work in this space. Okay, and I see in the county that they go to the newsletters, impact reports. Excellent, okay. I'm gonna, Elizabeth, have you move on just in the interest of time to the next slide. And I think to summarize, we are working on how to maintain sustainability and continuity of reporting, how to institutionalize these efforts, because it can't just come down on this small group of people that meet, quarterly. We want to continue to come up with methods to raise visibility of the project and the area of program of family resource management. We don't know when it's going to end or what our end game is, so we have to keep learning. We're still trying to figure that out. And we realize that there are other program areas in extension, like 4-H has a common measures that we haven't really explored enough. And then the community CRED also has the but-for principle that they are measuring impact with, and we need to learn more from them. So I'm going to open it up for questions. We can go to the next slide. And because we only have a couple minutes left, and we want to quickly acknowledge, though, everybody in FRM that's been contributing to our efforts, that we are deeply, deeply appreciative of the time and effort that they have given us to this project.
And Suzanne, can I make one statement? We were so focused on content that we didn't exactly think about evaluating this effort. So I just put a couple questions in the chat. If people could take a minute and just tell us one thing you learned today and one thing you might do with the information that we shared, because we really did want to emphasize that this is what we've done, and every program area and network is different, but we hope that there are some things that translate into the work that you do, and we want to challenge you to think about that as well. And of course, we're going to answer your questions, so I didn't mean to.
Barb Wallen from Iowa. has a program and wants to know, are the program leaders on board? And when we think of the FC, and I'm assuming you're thinking family consumer science program leaders, I would say unequivocally, yes, they are on board. And even when we had Toya Riggins at the federal level, she was, I would say, thrilled about this project, that she said it's a very tough nut to crack and that it was cutting edge work that you need to continue to do. And so we have had a lot of great encouragement, I would say. And Sheila wants a copy of our logic model, which we can share out again, that link, because it probably got lost earlier in the chat box. So thank you, Maria. All right, let's see what other questions we have. And Linda's going to take this back to Cornell with some of her folks.
I'm thrilled to see that so many of you are finding ways and thinking of ways that you can use this. So that's awesome. I guess we should say also, you have our emails. If you're not sure if your state is tied into this effort, or you would like to be tied into it if your state is not, feel free to contact us, one of us. I tend to be the keeper of lists and data, so you could start with me, but any of us can answer your questions as well. And you have our email addresses here.
Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth, Suzanne, and Maria. We enjoyed your presentation. It was most interesting. And if anyone has questions, please put them in the chat box and one of our presenters will reach out to you after we conclude. And again, just to follow up on Elizabeth's what did you learn, please put your responses in the chat box before you sign off. A reminder that this webinar will be archived on the ESP website, so look for it within a few days. And we hope that you will consider joining us for our next professional development webinar, Social Marketing Principles, scheduled for August 25th. And you can register for that on the ESP website. Thanks to everyone for participating in today's webinar. Have a wonderful day. Stay safe and take care.